Come on, Lions fans, because what I have to tell you today is exclusive and you will be the first to know. So do the following: click the like button and subscribe to this video because this is a daily commitment. Very important information has just arrived. Have you liked it yet? Now let's get to the news. There comes a time in the NFL offseason when the headlines start to thin out, the rumors intensify, and any movement becomes a topic of heated debate. We are exactly at that point in the season, when there are no big stories circulating, creativity or unbridled speculation takes over the conversations. It is in this climate that bold lists like the one from Bleacher Report emerge, which decided to choose one player from each team who should, or at least could, be traded before the start of the new campaign. And in the case of the Detroit Lions, the name mentioned was Amik Robertson. That's right. The 26-year-old had a 26-year-old cornerback who has been a useful piece on defense and who, despite having broken his arm in the playoffs, should not lose his place in. 2025 is now being pointed out as a possible target for a trade. But before fans panic, let's understand what's behind this suggestion and whether it really makes sense. Bleacher Report's main argument is that teams that are in Super Bowl or bust mode, as is the case with the Lions in 2025, don't have much room for sentimentality. It's all about immediate performance and strategic adjustments. And although Robertson has shown himself to be solid in coverage, with a passer rating allowed below 100 for the third consecutive year, the fact that he is entering the final year of his contract and is not seen as a fundamental piece in the future of the franchise makes him an interesting asset for a trade. Young, versatile cornerbacks are always coveted on the market, and the Lions could very well use this opportunity to get a draft pick or some reinforcement at another position of need. Even more so in a scenario where every move needs to be thought out with an absolute focus on winning now. In other words, the logic of the trade is not based on the player's current performance, but rather on the long-term projection and the market value he carries at this specific moment. Of course, it is important to emphasize that this type of analysis is often more theoretical than practical. So far, there's no evidence that the Lions front office is actively looking to trade Amik Robertson. On the contrary, everything indicates that he will be one of the important names in the secondary rotation in 2025. Therefore, if you are a fan of the player, you can breathe easy, at least for now. But the debate raised by the article brings up an interesting reflection. In a roster increasingly full of promising youngsters and rising players, how will the Lions deal with veterans who may not be in their future plans? It is a complicated equation, especially on a team that is one step away from stardom and cannot afford to make mistakes in roster decisions. Ultimately, Robertson's possible departure is more of an exercise in imagination than a concrete fact. But that doesn't make the discussion any less valid. The success of an NFL franchise often depends on knowing exactly when to capitalize on a player who still has market value, even if he can still contribute on the field. It's a chess move that requires coolness, planning, and foresight. And while trading a reliable and experienced defender like Amik may seem like a risky move, it could be just the kind of move that separates the teams that only dream of the Super Bowl from the ones that actually get there. Frank Ragnow's retirement puts the Detroit Lions in a tough spot. With organized team activities quickly coming to a close and training camp fast approaching, the Lions now need to find a reliable replacement for their four-time Pro Bowl and three-time second-team All-Pro center Detroit has begun to get a taste of what life will be like without Ragnow, as he was not participating in the preseason workout program. As a result, Graham Glasgow and Tate Ratledge were being drilled by the first team at center during the OTA practice open to the media last week. Regardless of who ends up starting center, the Lions' interior offensive line will look different. In 2025, in addition to Ragnow's retirement, last year's starting guard Kevin Zeitler left to sign with the Tennessee Titans. In the long term, Ratledge could be someone the Lions could consider to fill the position. However, he played exclusively guard in college and as such will need time to learn all the nuances that come with playing the center position. The Detroit Lions offseason has been a roller coaster of expectations, frustrations, and unfulfilled promises, especially when it comes to improving the pressure on the opposing quarterback. Fans, eager for an impactful reinforcement in the pass rush, continue to wait for that decisive move that will raise the level of the defense. From the beginning of free agency until the end of the draft, the Lions have been linked to practically every relevant edge rusher available, and even some who, in practice, were never really available. However, the reality is that the only name added so far to the defensive front came only in the 6th round of the NFL draft. This inevitably raises a question. Do the Lions still have an asset in store, or have they simply decided to bet on what is already at home? Bleacher Report analyst Mo Moton believes that the solution to this dilemma may lie precisely in the resume of an old acquaintance from the NFC North. In an analysis of the remaining moves each team in the league still needs to make before the 2025 season, Moton suggested that Detroit should consider signing former Chicago Bears defensive end DeMarcus Walker. Walker's name was even floated around the Lions' back room earlier in the offseason when the two sides met, but no deal was reached. At the time, both the front office and much of the fan base didn't see Walker as the missing piece in Dan Campbell's defensive puzzle. And with some reason, he's a solid player, yes, but he's unlikely to drastically change the team's current outlook. Walker has maintained consistent production over his past 2 seasons with the Bears, recording 3.5 sacks each year and totaling 39 pressures in 2024 alone. Those numbers, while respectable, aren't exactly enough to make him a game changer. Compared to Marcus Davenport, who was also in Detroit and still trying to establish himself, Walker represents a very limited room for improvement. Furthermore, with the recent addition of rookie Ahmed Hassanain via the draft, the Lions have already signaled that they are trying to address their depth needs in the defensive rotation through other means. The signing of Walker, in this context, may end up sounding more like an attempt to show action than, in fact, solve a problem. The big question that remains is it worth spending up to $21 million on a player who, at best, would be a supporting piece? Moton believes it is, seeing in Walker a veteran capable of contributing immediately without major adaptations. However, for a team that already has its starters defined in the pass rush and seems to be more focused on developing internal talent, the investment may not justify the return. Unless Detroit is planning a strategic change in the coming days, everything indicates that the organization is comfortable with the current roster, or at least has come to terms with it. In any case, the message to the fans is clear. Either the team will make a bold and surprising move, or the plan is to stick with the players already available, betting on teamwork and development as the real strengths for 2025. And now I want to hear from you, Lions fan. Do you think it's worth spending $21 million on DeMarcus Walker to strengthen the pass rush, or should that money be invested in another area of the team? In my opinion, bringing in a player who only had 3.5 sacks per season is the kind of move that seems more like desperation than strategy. If you're going to invest heavily, it should be in someone who can really change the game. But what about you? Do you agree with me? Or do you think Walker could add value coming off the bench? Comment below. I'd really like your opinion. Take advantage and like the video. It really helps the channel to continue growing and bringing more quality and frequent content about the Lions. Thanks a lot for following along, and let's continue this conversation in the comments. See you soon.